Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to NestCast Live. It's November 26th, 2020, and for the Americans joining us today, happy Thanksgiving. I'm Jim Chu, host of the Nest and NestCast Live, and we're here to discuss topics relevant to investing and entrepreneurship in emerging markets. And we do it with entrepreneurs and investors with first-hand experience on those topics. Thanks to Zoom, we can get an audience from around the world to join in the discussion. And to that point, I want to stress that this is not a webinar. It's an interactive open Zoom meeting where you can all participate. We left it open on purpose so that we can get your opinion. Do note that this conversation is recorded and will be available after the show on our Nest YouTube channel and as a podcast. You can find links to subscribe to both at findthenest.org. Few quick announcements. Don't forget to join us next week, same time. That's 8 a.m. San Francisco time, 4 p.m. London time, and 7 p.m. Nairobi time. You can always find links to put up on your calendar, to put the show on your calendar, and to join the meetings at, of course, findthenest.org. We want to hear from you. Use that chat box, talk to others watching the show, ask questions, and make your view known. We'll do our best to bring audience comments and questions into the conversation. Speaking of conversation, as I mentioned earlier before we started, I see today's discussion more like a rowdy dinner party than a fireside chat. I never have the time to sit by a fire, but we want to hear the right arguments. We want to hear everyone's opinions, so please jump in. At the same time, if you're not speaking, please put yourself on mute so that we can all hear clearly. And in the meantime, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do, which country you're from, your opinion about today's topic. All right, well, great. Over to our panel today. We have a lot of familiar faces. We put together a panel of both investors and entrepreneurs who've all been on the Nest, because we'd like to hear about your experience on the Nest, but also talk a little bit about crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding in particular, and ask the question, does crowdfunding work for startup fundraising? What is crowdfunding? Well, on that note, Raj, would you like to go first with a quick intro, and perhaps you can even share your experience being on the Nest and your opinion about it. And by the way, let loose.
Okay. So hi, everybody. It's really great to be here again. My name is Raj Kulasingam. I'm a lawyer at a firm called Dentons, but I'm also an active angel investor. And I've been on the Nest, I don't know, probably half a dozen times. I've invested through the Nest probably either directly or I've seen a portfolio company come onto the Nest. So I would say maybe 5 or 6 companies have either, I'm an investor in which has been through the Nest. And it's great to be here, and I'll be throwing some chairs.
Okay, great. Over to, let's see, who's next on our list here. Derrick, over to you.
Hey, what's up, Jim? Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to meet you. Those of you in the US, happy Thanksgiving. I'm Derrick Ashong. I'm the founder of AMP Global, which is a technology company built around media and entertainment. You could call us big data for big media. Super happy to be here. We had an opportunity to be on the Nest a few months back, and we were able to raise some capital, which helped close our seed round. And we are getting ready to officially launch on December 6th with a very, very special interactive media asset. It's a series called The Mic Africa. It is the first television format that's been born on the African continent to be exported around the world, powered by our big data engine to give the audience a voice in identifying the most creative and powerful talent across the continent.
Great. Thanks for joining us. And I heard you might be able to even, wrap your discussion or wrap your argument.
I mean, I'm always open, you know what I'm saying? Anything can happen.
Anything can happen. Great. Over to you, Geetha.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jim and the Nest, for having me back. I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation today. Just by way of giving a bit of context, for me, what's been interesting is making that shift towards angel investing coming from the private equity side. So that perspective is some of what I'd be looking to bring into the conversation today.
Great. That sounds wonderful. And yes, you're going to be brutally honest with us as well. Excellent. And over to you, Ope. Or Kiendel. Sorry,
Hi,
Kiendel.
everyone. Yeah, hi, everyone.
Go ahead.
My name is Ope Adeoye, founder at a company called OnePipe. I'm probably the least experienced person on this panel, first time-ish founder. OnePipe is a company that creates a platform that makes it easy for banks and businesses to partner better together. I think of it as mechanisms that let businesses launch a fintech in a box, kind of like that. I was opportune to be on the Nest a couple of months back. That experience really helped me to close out our pre-seed round and was very instrumental. I'm hoping I can have some things to contribute about my experience on this call.
And what I can say is I felt very fortunate to have had the opportunity to invest in your company, and I wouldn't have found out about it unless it was through the Nest. Could you share how much you raised through the Nest, or if you don't want to, that's okay too. But I would love to hear a little more details.
So I came to the Nest looking to raise. So the round itself was 450K. We had 150K left to close out the round when I came on the Nest. But the barrage of interest that came after the Nest made us have to recalibrate the round, and we kept pushing the round size higher and higher, and we ended up at 950K post the Nest.
Wow. Okay. So, well, hopefully the Nest helped make that easy, make the whole process easy. Wonderful.
Yes, it did actually.
Excellent. Kiendel, over to you. No, thank you, and welcome back. And over to you, Kiendel.
Thank you, and thanks, Jim, for inviting me back. I'm surprised, but thank you. I've been on the Nest a couple times. I am based in South Africa, but I'm actually American by birth. I've been investing in Africa for about 20 years. I invest on behalf of institutions, and in that capacity have mainly done fintech, but I'm also an avid angel investor, and I've gone quite wide. So health tech, logistics, what else? Data-driven businesses, and a few other verticals. And I just want to tell Raj that I'm not throwing chairs, but I'm going to throw dinner rolls, because you can't have a good dinner party without a good bun fight. So get ready.
Very good. Very good. Well, I guess that's all the panelists. And now over to our topic. Does crowdfunding work for startup fundraising? Who would like to jump in?
You know, Jim, I think I should go, because I'm not ready to throw chairs. And you know, someone once told me, I wish I met a lawyer who only had one hand. And the reason, I asked him why, and he said, well, because lawyers always say on the one hand and then on the other hand. So I'm going to give you two hands here. So on the one hand, I think it does work in more developed markets. I think I struggle to see it working in the form that it works here, for example, in the UK, on the continent. And maybe one of the first things that I would say is, what do we mean by crowdfunding? So I think the Nest is a sort of crowdfunding, but it's not the crowdfunding that I see, for example, as an angel here in the UK. So that's maybe my opening gambit on that.
Okay, and can I just jump in there really quickly, because I think you know, when we say crowdfunding, and maybe that's another question to address. Most people think about Kickstarter and Indiegogo or Kiva, and you know, I think there's this thing, whether you call it crowdfunding or something else, of making asset classes of investing more accessible to everybody, right? Whether that's you know, starting with public equities and something like Robinhood, or if it's something like Republic or Cadence that is essentially doing venture deals, but aggregating capital through a platform where somebody could even invest as little as, you know, $1,000. So you know, where I was quite excited about that idea is, you know, if we're able to create a platform where smaller check sizes are accessible to investing in startups, we could have more Africans investing in Africans. We can have more people from the countries, and that hopefully will make investment outcomes better, because, you know, foreign capital coming into a market doesn't always help. And so I think having more local capital be engaged, even if it's through this kind of platform, and really capturing the mass affluent. That might be something quite interesting. It could be even quite transformative for the continent. And that's just my opinion. Thoughts? Anyone else? Geetha?
Jim, I'd completely agree with you. I think part of the challenge that we've had in terms of financing businesses on the continent has always been, where's the money coming from? And unfortunately, from large cap to mid cap to small businesses, unless it's coming from friends and family, most of the more institutional funding has come from outside of the continent. And that has helped in certain cases. If you look at ESG and impact investing, this has been really rolled in, and Africa is much further ahead, I would say, than any other continent in terms of institutionalized approaches to sustainability within its investment approach. And that's because it was a condition of the funding that came from development finance institutions, for example. The flip side of that, however, is often, especially for smaller businesses, it's been really tough to get investors who fully understand the journey, the context, etc. And I know we have entrepreneurs on this call today who will be able to speak to that. One of the things, for me as an investor, I've observed over time has been really what feels like a breakdown. And here's my first, slight challenge here, especially moving to angel investing and venture investing as opposed to private equity investing. And this has been the source of heated debate at dinner parties with others I know. And this is, what are you actually investing in? Are you investing in real fundamental growth of these businesses, or are you investing in a speculative manner to benefit from what is effectively, what you're expecting as being a change in the valuation of the business? And this is something we've seen. I'm not quite sure work, but we've seen lots of evidence of this kind of investing happening in Silicon Valley. Is that what we want for places like Africa? I would say I really struggle with that, because I'm a fundamental investor. I really believe in creating real value and investing in businesses, creating real products, real services. So from an investment perspective, I worry about being able to bring in capital, which is really speaking to the needs of the entrepreneurs and the products and the services that are being created. We all know horror stories of businesses which have received capital, which does not understand the context, and the businesses have really suffered as a result, right? And neither the investors, nor the entrepreneur, nor the consumers have won. So I think there's real potential for crowdfunding, and I'm happy to talk to this a little bit later. But the first challenge here that I'd love to get some perspectives on is what role does fundamental investing have to play when you are crowdfunding, and what does that put in terms of pressure on entrepreneurs? In terms of the expectations of what's the kind of returns. On the PE side, top quartile performance over the last decade has been in the single digits. That's top quartile performance. So that's a question I have.
Yeah, so Derrick, I want to jump in and have something to address.
Okay, so I have a few thoughts. I have thoughts on the crowdfunding side, but what Geetha has raised is very much shots fired. There is an article recently that a friend just in Silicon Valley sent me. It's in the Atlantic. I believe the title is something along the lines of, will venture capital be the death of capitalism, or something along those lines? Or is venture capital destroying capitalism? And the basic case that they're making is that the interests of venture capitalists and the way that the VC game runs right now, particularly in Silicon Valley, is not necessarily about value creation, right? It's about valuation creation. And as what you're getting at, Geetha, is like there's a business model where you create some valuation bump in a company, and basically VCs are effectively selling valuation to other VCs rather than products or value creation to communities. And I think that this could be extremely destructive potentially for African communities, where you need innovation that actually touches people's lives. But I would throw out there that there's a challenge in considering that. And it may really require us to be very thoughtful about alternative financing structures, which is, if you're an African company, and let's say you want to compete in the global market space. Like, I don't believe in this idea of like, oh, you are doing a thing, you're coming from Nigeria, so obviously you have solutions for Nigeria. Nobody says that to anyone in Silicon Valley. They may start with Palo Alto, you're trying to dominate the world. I think we can be just as innovative as anyone else. If that's the case, here comes somebody and they've got $1 bazillion backing them out of Silicon Valley or elsewhere, and you meanwhile are trying to build your fundamentally stable business. How do you compete? And here's the trick. Let's say that you say, well, you know what, like we should be more humble, we should focus on our local markets, on our core markets. Great. What are the dominant social media platforms in Africa, or the dominant digital media platforms in Africa? When those cats come into town, they'll eat your lunch in Botswana too, right? And so I think that there has to be some real consideration about, we're building innovation in a global context, and we're dealing with global levels of financing that put our companies at disadvantage. And what are the things that we can do to counter that? I have some ideas, but I would like to throw that out to the panel.
Great idea, and I think, look, the other thought is, and I didn't see this statistic directly, but it was quoted to me earlier this week, which is the composition of entrepreneurs who receive funding from a crowdfunding platform versus, let's say, a more conventional VC platform is significantly different, right? You have a lot more minorities getting, at least in the US, a lot more minorities getting financed. And it's the nature of the capital changes. So I'm not saying necessarily it's better, there's pros and cons to every source of capital, but it does change the nature of the game. And again, my hope is that it can be more local or more African in terms of the investments.
Yeah,
Jim, can I throw my first share?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go on,
go ahead,
Kendall.
Kendall.
Please.
No, I just would say, just from a lighter side, and what I've seen in terms of access to capital through crowdfunding, and on the equity side, I'm actually surprised that we're talking about it, because the regulatory framework in Africa really doesn't allow for equity crowdfunding. It really, in terms of a formal equity crowdfunding platform, they don't really exist, or there may be one or two, but
South Africa is one.
Yeah, well, one. So, and I know those that have gone out of business because the regulator said, no, you can't do this. So I do see value in alternative financing mechanisms, and putting aside the discussion around predatory venture capital and PE. I think angel networks is a source of alternative finance. It's growing on the finance. So it's not crowdfunding per se, but it is a crowd of funders that get together and make investments together. And I like that in terms of the theme, Jim, that you mentioned around democratization of access to wealth building opportunities, because it's always been the playground of the very wealthy. And your sort of normal, investor that wants to invest in companies that align with their values really can't find those opportunities. So I think angel networks are a great way to do that. I think it's important that if someone's doing angel nesting or taking part in one of these crowdfunding platforms, that they're just aware, eyes wide open going in. I think it's always useful to know who's in that group. Are there experienced investors? Because, that you can sort of ride on to some extent if you're not an experienced investor, don't know the sector, or else, you could have a crowd of lemmings that are like all running off a cliff together, and you don't really want that. But I think there's a lot of value in that. Where I see a huge amount of opportunity in terms of crowdfunding for Africa is in marketplace platforms. So, for example, one that I've been working with is called Fint, based in Nigeria. And what they do, they're simply a platform that brings together and sort of matchmakes funders and borrowers. And what's very interesting about their product range is it can be as low as $10 to top up air. So there could be a group of loans for people who want to top up airtime. So for $10, you can top up airtime. If you want to fund a solar panel, or you want to fund actually an entire solar panel sort of installation, you can have $2 million investors that use that platform that are institutional investors or even banks. So I like this idea that that is bringing in local capital, and it's really matchmaking opportunities. I mean, I have issues around whether or not it's sustainable, because I have some experience with different networks, but that's a different discussion for another time. But I think in terms of an opportunity, it's a powerful one. Now, we just need regulatory frameworks to kind of come up to speed. And there's a great association called the African Crowdfunding Association that was started by Elizabeth Howard, an incredible source of knowledge about this on the continent.
Yeah, when you talk about legislation or regulation, some of this is really, or at least the way it's happened in the US, a lot of what I would put in the category of crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding, is not actually going through the regulation crowdfunding, right? What they're doing is using electronic tools, digital tools, tools for onboarding, automated onboarding, etc., to make the whole process of investing more frictionless, right? So the high touch VC model has always been, oh yes, we're going to go and talk to and get a bunch of big checks and we have our fund. But if you can make the process easier and less high touch, you can then pick up $10,000, $20,000 checks from the mass affluent, who are, by the way, accredited investors, right? Then you suddenly achieve the same thing. And we're seeing that all over, right? So there's, as I mentioned before, Republic, they don't go through regulation crowdfunding. They go primarily through Reg D, which is your standard investing process for any accredited investor. They've simply automated the onboarding process, document signing, et cetera, to make that really easy. There's another company called Cadence, also based in New York, this is in the US, that allows accredited investors, again, so there's no new regulation there, to invest in institutional instruments, mostly debt instruments, like a 9-month bond, they give you 12% yield. So those were once only available to what I would call institutional investors, very large investors, because the minimums are very high. But they're able to use these electronic platforms, digital platforms, to aggregate enough money to be able to give people like me an ability to invest in a $10 million bond issuance. So I find that interesting, and I think there's an opportunity to apply a lot of those digital platforms, not even necessarily change regulation, right? Apply these digital platforms to investing in Africa, investing in emerging markets, and see more people get involved in investing in that because they can access the ticket sizes. Raj, you were going to say something before.
Well, the chair I was going to throw was sort of in response to what Geetha and Derrick were talking about, and I think some people have described it as a bit of a Ponzi scheme, right? So your first investor, you get evaluation, you pass on the second investor, and my question and sort of observation is, is that such a bad thing? Because you're still creating jobs, you're creating value in the ecosystem. So is that in itself a bad thing, right? So question mark, right? And so Silicon Valley has created a number of Ponzi schemes. We've all seen this, and they've crashed and burned. But they've also created, some great companies which have returned incredible returns, but also created jobs and value and all the rest of it. So I'd be a bit careful.
I'm going to side with you on this one, Raj, and throw back some dinner rolls in the other direction, which is, look, I think I undervalue the value of angel networks and angel investing until I got out of US tech and realized, wow, what an important role angels, especially good angels, play in bridging the gap between friends and family money and real institutional VC money, right? And if you didn't have that pool of angel investors there, so many good companies would never have even gotten there. So, I'm totally with you. I think big VC, especially in the US, is a bit of a Ponzi scheme where people are just passing valuations off to among themselves. But I think there's true innovation that's being supported when we look at a lot of angel investing that's happening, in my opinion.
Agreed.
So I have a thought. I don't know if we throw in dinner rolls or chairs or is it time for bricks yet? But I'm ready to chuck something. I think I would agree that angels play a mission critical role. I think it's really powerful, and really good angels have a massive impact on the success of a business. And I have some thoughts. Maybe we can get into that later on of what makes a good angel. The thing that I think happens, Raj, to your point about why is it potentially problematic if they keep flipping these companies. I mean, well, for one, you do get some good value, but I would argue that I think there was a study that came out from the Kauffman Foundation or something like that that said something like, 90% of VC returns over the last like 20 years are coming from like 20 companies. I mean, it's
Yeah.
absurd. So that means that there's a small percentage of people in the VC game that are in the business of creating all this general value, and then everyone else is doing something. Well, what are they doing? If the case is that they're basically flipping valuation to other VCs, well, then the determinant of if this is an investable company is not, is this an innovation that could succeed? Is this a scalable enterprise? Could this business have a strong exit? The criterion is, could I sell this to one of my boys?
Yeah.
Okay, well, what does that mean? That means that when you come in and you look like all the people that the VC's friends are investing in, that sounds like a good bet that I could sell it to my boys. And when you're the wrong gender or race or ethnicity or whatever, and well, I love the business, I love the founder, amazing, but I mean, are my guys going to get it? It's a whole different ballgame. And the case would be like, well, if you were more innovative, if you were more creative, if you're a really strong founder, you would do better. That's part of the reason why we left the United States. We started in Silicon Valley and Hollywood, and we moved to the African continent because we realized that we weren't going to win at that game, but we could still win. And the question is, how do you develop ecosystems where people are investing to create value? And how do you measure that value? And how you do it in such a way that the companies coming from those ecosystems can be competitive against the companies that are just getting money chucked at them? I'll throw out one last thing, which is like, people talk about like the death of WeWork. And this is one of the things that was discussed in the Atlantic article, how it was such a debacle and oh my God, it's so bad. But a lot of people, smart people, were involved in it. And they made a very simple calculus. If things worked out, all the drama would be forgiven. It's only when things went sideways, big time, when it looked like the exit wasn't going to happen, then everybody got into, oh my God, we're about corporate governance. So at the same time, while they were going through that process, a ton of value of actual viable co-working businesses were wiped out.
Yeah, true.
So I'd love to hear a bit from Ope and, perhaps your experience with the Nest in particular and the angels that ended up investing. And full disclosure, I'm one of those angels. So you can say whatever negative things you want about me.
And the same here. And the same here.
And the same there. So how has your experience been? Have the angels that have invested in OnePipe added value to either the fundraising process or even to your company to some degree?
Yeah, so I would say for me, at some point I'm going to throw in a question as well. But what I've found interesting, so being a first-time fundraiser, so to speak, I've found that the value that OnePipe has received in the last 6 weeks has come mostly from either small funds or angel networks, like individuals that just want to roll up their sleeves, set up that intro for you, want to get your business to grow to the next point. But to Derrick's point also, I could also get a clear sense of when should we do your next round? Let me toss it to one of my boys that didn't get into this round. So there's a clear sign of the beginnings of what could be a Ponzi, but you can't take away from the fact that all of a sudden it's like OnePipe now has business development support from this army of 15 people ready to connect you, ready to grow business for you. You can't take away that reality at all. So I can say for a fact that if I could say my experience at the Nest was some form of crowdfunding, it has suddenly thrown business development support for OnePipe from 15 very great and connected people. And I can't take that away. Now, after that, I can also see the underlying, we need to get you to the next milestone quickly so that these boys that didn't make it into this round can get us to the next milestone. I can get a sense of that. And personally, I worry that what does that mean for me and for OnePipe? Does it mean that when I get to the next round, there's still going to be some other boys that didn't make it into that round? I want to get into the very next one. At what point do I get to say, guys, the markets can only yield X, the business can only produce Y, and this is what we want to focus and build a permanent business on? I don't know when that point will be, but clearly I can see that angel networks, if you call them crowdfunding, has been very helpful for OnePipe, but I can also sense that I'm about to get on the hamster wheel. and paddle. I can get the sense of that as well.
And so, well, I mean, it sounds like a great opportunity to play the angels off of each other and increase your valuation. So you know, I just as a clarification, I actually don't consider the Nest crowdfunding. Right, it really is. It's more akin to angel investing, but I do think there is some opportunities going forward in the future to involve more individuals into the deals that we're doing or deals that are happening through the Nest, and making 5,000. I don't know how many times I've heard, "Oh, hey Jim, can we pitch in 5,000 in that company?" I'm like, "Oh, that's just really tough, right?" Because Ope or Derrick, accommodating a $5,000 ticket on your cap table just does not make sense. And creating a syndicate, you have to reach a certain size before the economics make sense. But again, taking a lead from so many of these other crowdfunding, or not crowdfunding, these kind of, I call it digital securitization platforms. I think there is a interesting opportunity to do that, and I think we're trying to pursue it at the Nest. We're looking at different ways to allow individuals, even on the Nest, to be able to say, okay, I'm interested as an angel investor, I'm an accredited investor, and I want to pitch in a bit of money. And so I think that's something that I dream about, and that's where we're heading with the Nest. But another point for that you mentioned, Geetha, or something I just want a little bit of a plug on Untapped. I think one of the questions, and we asked this question in a past NestCast line, which is venture capital the right model for Africa? Is it funding? I mean, we need the Untypes of the world. We need a lot of these, asset-light, highly scalable services to transform the market. But then at the end of the day, what's the engine of growth in the continent? It's small and medium-sized enterprises. And so, is VC going to finance that? Hell no. So I think what we're trying to do at Untapped is find a way to allow more capital to go into small and medium-sized enterprises through asset financing. But we also intend over the next years to make that platform accessible to tiny tickets, $1,000, $5,000. And so Africans can, yes, of course I'm going to invest in electric motorcycles so that people can be providing moto taxi services on an electric motorcycle. I love that. And they pitch in some money. And that money doesn't go to a big a startup that is trying to, asset-light startup. It's going to finance assets for these SMEs that are growing. So, I think if we want to see the right type of growth in Africa, we need to rethink how we do our instruments of financing. And simply cutting and pasting venture capital from the US and applying it to Africa, not only will it not be that profitable, I think it's going to focus growth and capital in some of the wrong areas.
Jim, I'd love to pick up on some of what you're saying here, because for me, I almost feel like instruments are agnostic. Completely, it doesn't matter where in the world and so forth, but the context definitely matters, right? So I'd love to put some numbers around the discussion that we're actually having right now. So I was looking for this in 2015. It's estimated about $32.3 million was crowdfunded for Africa-based projects, but that accounted for less than 0.1% of global crowdfunding. But to the point you had spoken about earlier, changing to local funding. So these volumes reached $181 million, growing over 100% from 2015. But most of that, about 88% of 2016 volumes and 89% of 2015 volumes, was raised through foreign-based platforms headquartered in Europe and the US. Now, what does that actually mean? For me, I've been having discussions with a group of female entrepreneurs in one particular country who said each of us within this chamber have committed to putting X amount of capital because we're really tired of trying to push financing for our businesses. I did the maths and realized that was over $2 million a year that this group of women entrepreneurs was willing to put in. And I thought, okay, now this starts to get really interesting because you can start to put trusted intermediaries to try and bring the individual costs down. To your point, Jim, right, in terms of doing due diligence and being able to rely on the work that's done to get a transaction between past. I'm really excited with this entrepreneur I'm going to deploy and not be a tiny little portion of the cap table always knocking on the door. And this makes it easier. I mean, I'll tell you, I'm an investor in Derrick's business. And frankly, we had lunch, Raj, Derrick, and myself in New York. And by the time I left lunch, I knew I wanted to invest in his business before I'd seen anything on paper. And it's not often that I make investments like that at all. Derrick, you may be the only investment that I've gotten into based on that,
Well,
right?
You didn't talk to Ope. That was the problem.
Sorry, Ope, we hadn't met before this call. But, for me, I think there's great potential here, but the numbers are interesting. The actual gap in terms of financing, and the IMF has calculated this, between now and 2023 is $345 billion is the financing gap just for Africa alone. Yeah. Is crowdfunding going to sort that out? It certainly isn't. But I really see a wonderful opportunity to address some of the challenges that have historically been there. Ethiopia this year has been working on their startup proclamation. Policy is changing very quickly. Kenya is talking about this as well, a number of countries. And I find it interesting, when we talk about Africa, we always, as investors, start with, is the policy environment right? Well, take a look at Silicon Valley. I'll just read you something. Over the last 20 years, Silicon Valley has benefited from a once-in-a-lifetime alignment of advantages: American primacy, the ubiquity of cheap capital, the arrival of the smartphone, amongst other widely adopted tech innovations, and perhaps most significantly, a benign regulatory environment that has all conspired to create a historic concentration of wealth and power. We know this to be true. So why, as investors, are we coming into Africa and saying, no, but we need the policy environment to be right. We need the regulatory environment to be right. As long as you can deploy capital and, you don't have challenges in terms of taking your capital out, I think, a lot of us have been investing in SMEs for over, 14 years on the continent. And we've been able to put money in for the most part and take money out. So I feel like there's some really interesting things that could happen going forward, especially around thematic crowdfunding solutions. And
can I send you my deck?
I'm
only half joking, right? I mean, look, I personally believe very strongly, obviously, putting a lot of energy and money into Untapped, that if we can figure this out, we can figure out how to create a platform that can channel money into these MSMEs and do it effectively and do it at scale. We will transform the economies in emerging markets, starting with Africa. And so I'm taking a cue, we're taking a cue from all the things that's happening in developed markets, and then adapting that to what's happening, what's needed in emerging markets. And I think, again, I want to be successful. Obviously, if we are successful, when we are successful, hopefully we'll see a lot more money going, a lot more capital going to the small guy who really just needs money to buy a motorcycle or a biowater treatment system or whatever it is.
Can I throw in a thought? Oh, go ahead, Kiendel.
Go ahead.
No, you first.
Yeah, it's so polite. It's so nice.
I know, there's no bun throwing.
No, Raj has got all the chairs.
It's my turn.
I mean, one of the things that I found interesting in the last few years is that you're starting to see a lot of these alternative investment instruments. I mean, one of the real problems, and this goes back to the original question, is VC or even traditional private equity right for African markets? And in a lot of respects, no, because you really need, for a lot of investments, you need patient capital. You need capital that doesn't fit in the 10, we invest, we start harvesting at 5, we may be able to add on an extra year, but it doesn't really fit the funding needs or the cycles of a lot of African businesses, particularly those that are just playing this very long patient game of building infrastructure, across the continent to get the kind of network effect that makes that solves for fragmentation of markets in Africa. So but it doesn't, and the other thing that I think is an issue for a lot of local investors is the need for liquidity. And And even with the venture fund model not working for the companies, it also doesn't work for investors because there's no liquidity. You can't get out. You can't rotate your capital. So I think it's quite interesting, a lot of the alternative structures that are coming in, like venture debt funds, that are lending, but they're self-liquidating, but they provide some equity-like return to the investor as well. Or revenue share models are coming up where a lender says, okay, here's some money. You can pay it back. You're risky, but I like the idea of you paying back by sharing some of your revenue with me. And then we unwind that instrument over time.
Kiendel, can I send you the Untapped deck as well? we're trying to do exactly that, right? We're trying to provide liquidity to investors, but also allow them to benefit from some of the upside. So anyway, I don't want to talk too much about Untapped, but I think. Go ahead.
If I can jump in a little bit. So while I'm not a finance expert or an investment guru or anything like most of the guys here, one of the things that I firmly believe in is that the African continent will only, just like Jim mentioned before, will only rise on the back of millions of small businesses. Many of these millions of small businesses don't precisely need venture capital that puts them neck to neck with people like Airbnb or any one of those bigger opportunities. That's not what those businesses need. My thinking, therefore, is that some sort of instrument, maybe driven through crowdfunding, is potentially necessary to finance these types of businesses en masse in a manner that still provides some form of liquidity to those who are participating in such opportunities. And that when the time does come for investors who participate in such mechanisms, and the time comes and they feel they would like to play the Silicon Valley game as well, if there's a mechanism where a portion of that portfolio can be flipped upwards into venture models, and maybe that could be interesting. But I think primarily, if Africa will really rise as we want it to, it will be driven by many small businesses that you Silicon Valley folks have learned to call lifestyle businesses. That's what Africa needs, right? Many lifestyle businesses properly funded.
And just to clarify, most of the world has been grown or developed or made rich off the backs of small businesses. Sorry, Derrick, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a thought, and matter of fact, I have another brick. It's time to throw it. So basically, I think that this is good, and what you're saying, I don't disagree, but I would argue that we are looking at the question from the wrong angle. And I'll give you a quick statistic and then why I think this brick matters. So in the beginning of this COVID lockdown, the internet usage worldwide went up by 70% in the matter of like 6 weeks. Explosive. We never seen anything like it. In Africa, the mobile internet, which is how most people get online, is flat at about 7% mobile internet use. We were looking at, well, why is this happening? We talked to the GSMA, we talked to a bunch of telcos, we dove deeper. And there were two things. One is like a lack of like digital education and understanding how to leverage the internet and also the benefits of it. But even more fundamental was just we pay the highest prices for mobile data of anywhere on the planet. Come back to the VC side and then to the small business side. If you're an entrepreneur, venture-backed style business in Mumbai, and you're looking for capital, and you go out to an investor, you're like, got this market of about 1.3 billion people. I'm going to go and make it happen. They're like, oh, we see the opportunity for scale. Okay, maybe we'll back you. If you're in China, yeah, I see it. 1.4 billion people. Here's my market. Okay, I see you. Let's make this happen. Okay, so now you're an investor, an entrepreneur in Lesotho. I mean, what? You know what I'm saying? Like, how are you going to compete on a global stage? How are you going to get the backing to even take your brilliant innovations out to that market and get the capital you need to scale? You won't, because we're atomized into these little teeny tiny markets. But if you put us together, it's 1.3 billion. Why can't we put these markets together? Because the way that typically works is you have something that reduces the friction of market entry, right? And scalability. And that's technology. If people have access to the internet, there's all kinds of things are possible. And we're talking about ways in which we increase financing into markets that haven't really become fully realized markets. And what I would argue is we need to deal with that gap first. Maybe it's parallel, but none of this stuff will work without it. Even if you get into SMEs, you know, you look at a place like Miami. Miami has got the highest per capita percentage of, I guess, entrepreneurs in the country, way more than Silicon Valley. This is in the United States. Most of them are SMEs,
Yes.
right? So if you don't give people the tools to live, to exchange, to do baseline business, whether it's VC scale business or SME, we'll still find ourselves hobbled because we haven't solved the fundamental problem.
Yeah, but I would argue that there's an opportunity because of the increasing digitization of the informal markets that those markets don't go directly to a digitized peer-to-peer, digitized transaction market versus having to go through more of an institutionalized model, which is what Europe, United States, other countries have gone through in the 20th century. So I think there's an opportunity there to potentially leapfrog because of this mass digitization of informal markets. I mean, we in the US, what is Uber? It's essentially a peer-to-peer transaction, right? And we're using the digital platform to re-enable that because it's better than the institutional model of a taxi cab running everything. And I think Africa,
But it requires internet.
It requires internet, yes, but to your point, we need more infrastructure and more people on it. But I think that's going to happen. Perhaps it needs to happen more quickly, but it's going to happen. And when it does, I think there's an opportunity to really create transactions that are digital peer-to-peer that will put, I think M-Pesa, for one, M-Pesa, that in itself is the best example of leapfrogging, going to a peer-to-peer model.
Jim,
Just to go ahead, Raj. This time you go.
Jim, I think I want to pick up on something Ope said, right? Which, and maybe a couple of other people, it's, how do you promote greater, whether you call it crowdfunding, angel investing, whatever, how do you make it more accessible, more desirable, etc.? And I think there's a few things I want to say. One is, we need more good news stories, right? So the Paystack story is a great story for Africa, okay? And if you look at, and I'm just seeing all the time now, little networks coming out of Nigeria of angel investors who club together, and are doing stuff. So that's great. So we need more good news stories. We also need, I think, better infrastructure, which is what Derrick said. We need, I would disagree with Geetha say, you don't need regulation. I think you can make regulation better. Sure, of course, you can do it without regulation, but I think you can actually make regulation better. Look, the UK has got EIS and SEIS schemes where basically people can invest and you get 30% or 50% of your money back through your tax regime. Now, none of the African countries have that. It's not that difficult to put in place. That would incentivize more local.
That would do a lot.
Local investors, right? And then the other thing I want to say, the thing I want to start off with is how do you get your money out? Okay, so this idea of having a secondary market, self-liquidating mechanisms, I think if you can fix those two things, right, I think you'd really see, this space move. I think you need lots of things, but I think that as well, right? How do you liquidate? How do you get your money out? You put your money in. Okay, I hope you're going to make me lots of money, but I have no idea when I'm going to get my money out. And I know you and I had a conversation about can you tell me I'll get my money out of Series A? And you said no.
Yeah.
Raj, why are you putting people on blast? Raj is throwing like the whole house in the game, just like you said no. I have one quick thought for be quiet for a second. Just for clarification, because I heard Raj mention this and Jim mentioned this when about what I said about internet access, and we talked about more infrastructure, the need for more infrastructure. And infrastructure sounds like money. It's going to cost money to build infrastructure. So we were having a conversation with the GSMA, and they told us that a country like Rwanda, for example, has got something like maybe about 95% 4G penetration. It's got maybe like 12% 4G usage. What I'm saying is that there is a massive problem in front of us that doesn't require capital intense solutions. It requires innovation and creativity, perhaps new business models, perhaps figuring out new incentive models. But why are we paying in Africa? So the typical cost per percentage of monthly income that goes to mobile in developed economies or standard economies, whatever you want to call it, is about 2% of monthly income. Africans pay on average 9% of monthly income, right? It's almost a 5x more in our markets. There needs to be some consideration of how do we not build more towers? How do we build more fluid flow of resources so that all of the things you guys are talking about become more viable? Because if you create a secondary market for entrepreneurs who can't actually access the core market of consumers, you're still not going to generate the value that's required for these companies to be competitive.
I just to support Derrick. Oh.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, Kiendel, you didn't have a chance to jump in earlier, so go ahead.
To support Derrick on this, and I sometimes will, I have a trusted friend and colleague who's much more senior than I am. He's been in he calls himself he says he hates banking, but he was a career banker for 40 years. And I read ideas by him, and I was talking about the unified data API and this and that, and he just looked at me and he kind of shook his head and he said, "Look, we have 3 problems to solve. We need very inexpensive data, to Derrick's point. We need data that people can afford. We need ubiquitous, zero-cost payments, and we need digital identity. Until you solve those 3 problems, you're wasting your time." And that's what he's doing now as a retired banker, is he's trying to solve some of those problems. So I totally agree with Derrick that if you don't start really addressing these infrastructure issues, the potential of the digital economy is not going to be realized.
A good article, Ope, by the way, you just posted on.
Yeah, great article.
Great article.
Take a look at that. The article is an online stock exchange for small tech companies in Nigeria.
It's about 3 years old, by the way, or 4 years old. It was random.
Better updated, buddy.
Yeah, and look, again, going back to digital securitization, I think the natural evolution of digital securitization is to create secondary markets and even online digital markets, exchanges for different companies and different financial instruments. I want to read a point that Ahmed Banu, I think from Nigeria, made online. He mentions, he cautions that if crowdfunding isn't managed well, crowdfunding is now becoming the easiest means to Ponzi schemes get set up. Right. So, we've mentioned this before, but I think it's a point really worth making, which is appealing to mass investor markets. There's some danger there of people getting hoodwinked, lots of it. And so we need to be conscious of that, and we need to make sure that there's responsibility and there's a bit of curation, there's a bit of making sure that the people who are investing aren't tossing in their life savings. So I don't know what the answer is there, but that's definitely a good comment. Thank you for that, Ahmed.
Jim, I think it makes a lot of sense because as the numbers get larger, we know there's plenty of regulation in place to ensure that you're pitching to investors who are considered to be qualified investors and aware of the decisions that they're making. There's regulation across Africa in terms of if you are trying to attract investors with the larger ticket items, what you are able to say, and how you're able to substantiate that. So on the crowdfunding side, what I find quite interesting here is, Ope, that's a very interesting idea that you've proposed, and I think it'll be good to get that in place. And it solves for how do you create that vetted pipeline. Fraud happens. We know it happens. Look at what just happened with Wirecard in Germany, right? Yeah. They made $2 billion up, and now when you look at the exchange, you realize that there wasn't a requirement for audited financial statements, and this is Germany. Yeah. So one of the things that I wonder about is when we start looking at the big pictures, again, if I go back to Africa and think about this from a big picture perspective, we know we need more infrastructure. We need more access to electricity. Once you go down that rabbit hole, it doesn't seem like it's investable. But at the same time, we as individuals either are running businesses on the continent or investing in businesses on the continent. So for me, this discussion, when I think about what's it going to take to get more crowdfunding, and the answer is to get more people to be willing to do this, including making this, sharing this information, even within our own networks, because most folks will actually be investing small amounts in businesses, whether they know they're going to get the money out or not, on the listed side, etc. And I think when we talk about financing some interesting opportunities on the continent, I'm still left with a question mark as to how you can get a larger number of these seen so that individuals can determine which businesses appeal to them. What do they think there's an opportunity set in, etc. I think there's a lot of opacity there, which would be good to try and address, because without that being addressed, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to the numbers that we would really want to see on the crowdfunding side.
Yeah, well, definitely worth having a follow-on discussion with you. And I'd love to have that follow-on discussion with you on that as well, Geetha. It's very relevant to what we're trying to do, both with the Nest and with Untapped. So there are a couple of comments from the audience related to what we were discussing earlier. Comment from Saeed Yemi Awojide, sorry for the mispronunciation. Nigerian government is making serious efforts to reduce cost of data and also rolling out Wi-Fi access nationally. And also, Kiendel, thank you for sharing the name. Elizabeth Howard, founder of Africa Crowdfunding Association, is the expert on the continent about enabling frameworks for crowdfunding. So great, thank you for both of those. And there's 2 minutes left, so I just want to give everybody a chance to make a final comment. Any final comments? Who would like to start?
Well, I started, so let me start as well. So Jim, first of all, I think what you're doing with the Nest has been great, and I think I've seen some great companies, and I think you need a lot more nests like this, and I think hopefully it'll encourage people to to see the benefits of something like this. I also think that there's a lot more that can be done. I don't think you have to wait for regulation. I think that there's a lot more that can be done in this space on the continent, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happens sooner rather than later. It feels like somewhere like Nigeria and Kenya would be a starting point, but I think one of the challenges that is this lack of disposable income. So you're still talking about angel investing being a very, very small sliver of society in places even like Nigeria and Kenya, right? I mean, that's why it hasn't taken off in South Africa. So I'm not convinced you're going to see the kind of digital platforms that we see here in the near future. But I think it's great that what you're doing. I think you'll actually be a catalyst for lots of other things that'll happen in the space. So great, well done.
Thank you very much, and I hope to prove you wrong. I hope to pull out or get folks who I call the mass affluent, even in Africa, involved. A lot of people have the money to be able to invest in their continent, and let's help them do it. All right, anybody else?
I'd agree with you, Jim. I mean, we know that we've been trying to get some statistics around what's the size of the middle class in Africa for a long time. And, the latest numbers are roughly at around 330 million people. And, just so that we aren't in danger of conflating the wrong things, we're not talking about crowdfunding for those who are, below the poverty line. We're talking about those who have disposable income. And how many people have disposable income? Take a look at how much money is spent by exactly these individuals on educating their children outside of the continent, on healthcare outside of the continent, on regular trips to Europe, North America, to Asia, etc. We cannot say that there is insufficient capital from this group of individuals. And there's actually appetite. I do believe that there is appetite. But what may not be as clear is line of sight to be able to find great entrepreneurs like Derrick, like Ope, and to be able to go through that process with them to know that this is what the business is and this is what I think I can do with my capital, and hopefully get some funding back. So Jim, I think there's real opportunity here. I am particularly excited about more thematic vehicles coming up in the future, because then I think what you get is a compounding of success. Because I would personally feel quite excited about investing in a crowdsourcing platform around agriculture, for example, because all the portfolio companies are within agriculture. I think there'll be benefits within that portfolio as opposed to having a fully diversified portfolio. And I think it gives us access to diversify across the continent as well in a way that we wouldn't currently. I know my own portfolio is very heavily weighted between the usual suspects, right, which is Nigeria and Kenya, with a little bit outside of those two countries. And I would personally love to see a little bit more allocation to places like Francophone West Africa. Lesotho, maybe not yet. Maybe not yet. Okay. But
cannabis. You can do cannabis in Lesotho.
Raj, I'll leave that one to you.
What do you know about that, Raj?
Sorry, good question, my brother. Good question.
Derrick, final thoughts.
Oh, very quickly. Usually I don't like to talk about things I don't know about, but I'm just going to do it anyway today. I think that there's some very interesting models for sort of accelerators, et cetera, that have come onto the continent, trying to educate entrepreneurs. Just riffing off of what Geetha said, it might be interesting to see where there are opportunities for educating the potential investor class, whether it's in equity crowdfunding, whether it's in, how to evaluate startups, how to become parts of networks like the Nest. I think that this is a wonderful place. When I've come to be here, not only as an entrepreneur, but even as an audience member, I've learned a lot. And I feel like if more people understood the opportunity, the value, and how to go about it, we might be able to get more people joining that investment class.
Absolutely. Kiendel. Oh, you're on mute, Kiendel.
I love the Nest. I mean, I think it's just an amazing show. And, one of the things I think it's great about it is, one, you actually become exposed to a lot of different investors. I mean, I actually take pictures sometimes of the participants and the list, cyber stalk them later.
I need to dress better.
I haven't thought about that one. I should do that.
and exposes me to companies that I never necessarily would have invested in or been interested in, and it starts to really turn the wheel. So I think that's great. And just one sort of final thought, and I think we do really, I think there's lots of opportunity for retail investors to get involved. It doesn't have to be accredited investors. And one of my favorite stories is PiggyVest. It's a digital platform, collects savings from members, from participants, and then they invest them in higher yield opportunities. A recent investment was a loan to an agricultural aggregator that used it to offtake smallholder farming, which was then export, that could be used for local markets or export markets. And it's being creative in finding the ways that you can crowdfund in different channels to have that kind of impact and allow everyone to participate and generate yield, I think is important and possible.
Great. And I'm going to throw in a final thought as well, which is, I think, and this wasn't necessarily something that I knew was going to happen when we started the Nest, but I've just been so amazed with all the great entrepreneurs that I've met through the Nest. And it really is a privilege to be exposed to all these great entrepreneurs, great ideas, great markets, and understand it. And our hope is that because more and more people can see and hear directly from the entrepreneurs through the Nest or through other platforms, fine, we can, I hope, to change people's image of what, especially those who are not already actively investing in Africa. Change the image. Oh yeah, no, I care about Africa. I want to donate some money. No, don't do that. You should be investing in the continent you want to make change. And you know what? For everybody that says, oh yeah, the best entrepreneurship is in the valleys. When you come on the Nest and you hear some of the entrepreneurs like Derrick and Ope pitch and understand the market they're going after, it's inspiring. And so I hope that we can have more people like that coming in, seeing and changing their minds about what investing in emerging markets is like. It's not just impact investment, it's investing. Thank you for everybody for being on the show today, for the panelists taking their time. And I do hope that we see you next week at our next Nest. Next is a joint session with Plat6 Labs Tunisia. And the week after that, December 10th, we'll have a session in French. And final thoughts, Nest, that's syndicated. It's open source. Anybody wants to start Nest in their region, in their sector, please, we're happy to show you how we do it and you take it on. Thanks everybody. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.